Let's talk about some projections for the new year. Economic expert and managing director of Financial Derivatives Company Limited, Bismarck Rewane, joins me on the program. Mr. Rewane, thank you for joining us on the program and Happy New Year to you. You might have to unmute your mic. I can hardly hear you from here.
Um,
All right. It's good
I'm
now.
unmuted. I am unmuted.
All right. Great. I can hear you now. We'll get to the projection shortly, but the president is describing leadership at the subnational level as central to achieving food security, economic prosperity, and rapid national growth. After all, they get 65% of federal allocation. What do you make of the role governors have to play this year in driving economic development?
Firstly, let me make something very clear. The total government expenditure the total government expenditure as a percentage of total GDP is less than 15%. In other words, if you add all the government expenditure and consumption together, it doesn't make up to 15%, most likely about 12% of the gross domestic product of this country. So government expenditure and the way it is deployed and the efficiency with which it is deployed would have nominally will have an impact on GDP, but will not have that much significant impact. The most important component of GDP today is one, aggregate consumption, that is total consumers put together in the private sector. And secondly, we would also have a situation where investors and investment is important. So it's not government alone, because we have what we call fiscal dominance in this economy. We now need to reduce that. And this administration, coming from the private sector driven perspective, is trying to de-emphasize the role of government but also to ensure that government expenditure is distributed equitably at all levels. But generally speaking, I would emphasize that Nigeria's GDP in 2025 is going to be much more dependent on the role of the private sector, the role of investors, and more than anything else, consumption of people. Now, one element in this which is very, very important is what we call the net exports. So our exports minus our imports. We have seen that because of exchange rate depreciation, the level of our imports is actually reducing. We've also seen that because of an impetus and some incentives, we are now beginning to export
We're working on getting that smooth connection back with Mr. Rewane. We lost you for a minute.
Okay.
Please go ahead now.
Okay, so let me come back to what I'm saying. I said the role of government in determining the GDP growth of this country is going to be reducing over time. There's no question about that. So the composition of government expenditure, whether it's local, federal, and state, is important, but it is not going to be the catalyst that will make us achieve the goals, the broad macroeconomic goals of this country in 2025.
So you have also been talking about how ambitious Mr. President's goal of reducing the inflation rate from 34 to 15% is. Of course, quite a number of economists like you are saying that goal may not be realistic. But I want you to speak about what you consider to be realistic, because you are projecting that the economy will wiggle and grow by 3.5 to 4%, and that inflation will moderate towards 27%.
Yes, that is a movement in the right direction. But you see, we are free to have our aspirations, we are free to have our ambitions, but I deal in the world of reality. I cannot see, with all the projections before me, how the economy the inflation will reduce from 35% all the way to 15%. Taking 20% off the rate of inflation in a period of 1 year it will be a miracle. But again, miracles happen. So I want to deal in the world of reality. And I think that
Well, I guess our own reality has to do with the quality of a network connection with Mr. Rewane. Mr. Rewane, we're having some difficulties staying on this conversation with you, but can you hear me now?
I can hear you clearly.
Okay, let me just quickly highlight some of Mr. President's positive economic indicators upon which he has premised his expectation for the new year. Is highlighting the issue of decrease in fuel prices, foreign trade surpluses, a strengthened naira. He even mentioned that he's been able to meet all government's financial obligations without resorting to NNPCL for funding. You're saying these indices aren't enough, right?
No, what the president is talking about is that government expenditure to serve as a catalyst for growth. He believes that government expenditure will help if it's deployed efficiently. It will lead to what I can call optimal growth. We believe that it is a combination of government expenditure and government optimality combined with private sector investment mobilized, right? Combined with correct policies. When you put all of this together, you begin to see a slight and a moderate improvement in economic activities. 2025 will be better than 2024, but it's a year that right? It's what we call, it's not a year for the faint-hearted, in the sense that we will struggle as people, we will confront inflation, will help to bring it down because of output, but the government has to do a lot in terms of its policy consistency, in terms of the execution of the strategy, and also in terms of credibility of its policies so that people do not think that the rich will get richer and the poor will get poorer in this environment. I think that's key to how the policies will be implemented, and it lags between when the policies are announced and the effect it will have on the people. I think that's very important because there is a cost of living crisis and there's also hardship. Therefore, we are talking about comparable and equitable distribution of the sacrifice. That is part of the economic message that I think I hear in the budget, and what I'm hearing the government is trying to accomplish. But as economists, I'm facing the reality, and that's why we came out with clear understanding of what we think will happen. Like I said in this paper, Nigeria's economy will wiggle and grow by 3.6 to 4%. But that is compared to 2% of 3 years ago. It's a significant improvement. It's almost double in terms of the growth rate. But the growth rate is nothing if it's not equitably distributed and it does not provide welfare and comfort to the people. Like I said, inflation will moderate from 35 to 27%. That is significant. You are talking about almost a 33.3% reduction in the rate of inflation from 35 to 27%. It means that prices will still increase, but they'll be increasing at 27%. However, you must understand that the national basket itself has not been reconstituted since 2009. So if you reconstitute the basket, you might begin to see that inflation may be higher than that. We also believe that few policy aspirations would actually will lead to growth in the year, but let us not be deceived that it's going to be what they call a silver bullet. It means there's work to be done, and that there has to be some credibility in the policies themselves. People must believe it, and also people must begin to see that there's an equal and equitable sharing of the burden of this growth because there's sacrifices all around. We also believe that the fiscal deficit as a percentage of GDP would reduce. It would have been 8, 10, 11% if we had not done things about the subsidies on the exchange rate and subsidies on the on petroleum products. So that fiscal deficit will come down to about 5% of GDP, and that is a major accomplishment.
You have, Mr. Rewane, you have highlighted some factors that will contribute to growth this year. Part of it are new investments in the oil and gas sector. I wanted to speak to what we should expect based on what we've seen with the Warri refinery. We're told is operating at 60%. The Port Harcourt refinery came upstream last year, and the operations we're seeing at Dangote refinery.
I think that at the end of the year, you would see that Dangote Refinery will control over 90% of the market. We have heard, we've heard reports of Warri Refinery producing naphtha. We have heard reports of the Port Harcourt One Refinery produces 60,000 barrels of products. We're not sure that this data can be considered to be reliable. But as far as we know, we do know that today there is a price war. We do know that there are no queues. We do know that petrol is being sold anywhere between 935 and 1,065. And you can get petrol anywhere in the country. We do know that the Dangote Refinery is also deploying about 2,000 trucks so that we'll have a distribution of products all across the country. I think that those are major game changers in terms of the downstream. So the big challenge is that there's now need to invest in the pipelines, depots, and storage depots and tanks, pipelines, and the tank farms that will store this product, and so that the products are available at any point in time at a fair price across the country. And this will reduce logistics cost. If logistics cost comes down, then the aspiration to get what I call it, to get inflation down to levels of around 27, 25% will be achievable. But those things, the time between when the policies are announced, when the investments are made, and when the impact will be felt, it's not going to happen in 2025. So that's why I'm saying that the aspiration is good, but the reality is that we are not going to get there until certain things are done, and they have to be done starting like yesterday.
We've heard from Mr. President saying that his strategy to driving down the cost of food has to do with boosting food production and promoting local manufacturing. What do you make of this strategy, and how do you see it impacting on economic growth and development?
Well, first and foremost, agriculture is on the subsidiary list, that is both at the state level, federal level, and even to a large extent at the local government level. I think it's a good objective and a good goal to announce these things. But the reality is that agriculture is not going to transform itself in one budget cycle, right? There has to be investment in fertilizers, which we now know that we are producing over 4 million tons of fertilizer. And those fertilizers, we have to adopt land preparation. We have to adopt genetically modified seedlings as well. All of these things put together, it takes more than 1 year to achieve this thing. But it's important that the government sets its goals clearly, and that those goals have been announced in the budget speech, right? Yeah. Now, it now has to be implemented at all levels. We're collaborating with the private sector, especially the private sector, because we do know that post-harvest losses come as high as over 40 or 50% of our production. If post-harvest losses are reduced because of low logistics costs and goods going from the farms to the storage, and from storage to the markets and the manufacturers, that can help to bring down inflation. And I think that is the whole process that we are beginning to see. It's good that the government has announced its objectives and its goals. It is now time for the investors, manufacturers, and agriculture, the farmers, to actually participate in this process to ensure that it is accomplished in the shortest possible time. But again, I don't want us to be carried away by the fact that we should have expectations that in 3 to 6 months, food prices are going to come down, because the harvest season is not until later in the year. The planting season is now. And when are you going to plant? When are you going to reap? And then before it begins to have effect on prices. So again, good policies, good announcements, but let us not get carried away by the fact that the time is too short for you to see the effect in this particular fiscal year.
Quick one, you have also identified telecommunication infrastructure investment and tariff review as part of factors that will facilitate growth in the new year. Explain that to us vis-a-vis telcos now eyeing 100% increase in tariff. What does that mean for customers?
The telcos are asking for 100%. I am not sure that the government will accede to that, because it adds to cost. But what you must understand is that if telco services are improved and the quality of service is improved, it actually leads to greater efficiency in the economy and leads to output growth. And that is the key. Telecom contributes about almost 12 to 14% of GDP. But because telemedicine, because tele-education, because the airline system is all tied to this, the payment system, OPay and all the others, everything is tied to the telco sector. If the quality of service in that sector improves, payment systems are efficient, the velocity of circulation of money increases, you will see the impact immediately. And one very important element is that your vandalism and oil theft today will be something that can be contained if the telcos deploy drone technology so that those pipelines can be secured and our oil production can increase by at least 200,000 to 300,000 barrels a day. If that happens, can you imagine what will happen to the Naira if we get 200,000 to 300,000 extra barrels of oil a day in this country? You can imagine what will happen to the Naira, you can imagine what will happen to inflation, and you can imagine what will happen to government revenues and the welfare of the people. So I don't want us to look at telcos asking for an increase in tariff. I want us to look at it as telcos asking to increase their investment and increase the quality of service and improve the efficiency in the economy.
I know you have said that it's not a year for the faint-hearted. It's going to be survivor of the fittest. But just give us one good news that Nigerians can anticipate, from your economic lens in the new year.
The good news is that your growth, the average growth for the past 5 years has been roughly 1.8 to 2%. This year, you are going to be growing, all things being equal, you could achieve growth of 4%. That is double the average of the past 5 years. That alone, right? And it's all about output and growth. It is not about revenue. It's about growth and output. And growth and output is a function of investment. So when people now see that you are growing, they begin to invest. When they invest, you begin to have a multiplier effect on investment, which will affect the lives and welfare of the people. That's the message. That is how economists look for growth. Accountants look for budget balance or budget, how to fund the budget. Economists look for growth. And output growth brings down inflation, increases people's income, increases their welfare, provides food security, and makes the country a better place than it was before now.
MD Financial Derivatives, Bismarck Rewane, thank you so much for talking to us on the program.
Thank you for having me.
That's our show today, everyone. Thanks for being a part of it. You can watch it again at midnight and 6 a.m. tomorrow. I am Nifemi Oguntoye.